Whether we examine ancient history, or simply the times in which we live, we shall see clearly how great is the number of those who, having by shameful means won the ear of princes, who either profit from their villainies or take advantage of their naivety, were in the end reduced to nothing by these very princes. And although at first such servitors were met by a ready willingness to promote their interests, they later found an equally obvious inconsistency, which brought them to ruin. Certainly, among so large a number of people who have at one time or another had some relationship with bad rulers, there have been few, or practically none at all, who have not felt applied to themselves the tyrant's animosity, which they had formerly stirred up against others, most often after becoming rich by despoiling others under the favor of his protection. They find themselves at last enriching him with their own spoils. Even men of character, if it sometimes happens that a tyrant likes such a man well enough to hold him in his good graces, because in him shine forth the virtue and integrity that inspire a certain reverence even in the most depraved, even men of character, I say, could not long avoid succumbing to the common malady, and would early experience the effects of tyranny at their own expense. A Seneca, a Burrus, a Thracia, this triumvirate of splendid men will provide a sufficient reminder of such misfortune. Two of them were close to the tyrant by the fatal responsibility of holding in their hands the management of his affairs, and both were esteemed and beloved by him. One of them, moreover, had a peculiar claim upon his friendship, having instructed his master as a child. Yet these three, by their cruel death, give sufficient evidence of how little faith one can place in the friendship of an evil ruler. Indeed, what friendship may be expected from one whose heart is bitter enough to hate even his own people, who do naught else but obey him? It is because he does not know how to love that he ultimately impoverishes his own spirit and destroys his own empire. Now, if one would argue that these men fell into disgrace because they wanted to act honorably, let him look around boldly at others close to that same tyrant, and he will see that those who come into his favor and maintained themselves by dishonorable means did not fare much better. Who has ever heard tell of a love more centered, of an affection more persistent? Who has ever read of a man more desperately attached to a woman than Nero was to Poppaea? Yet she was later poisoned by his own hand. Agrippina, his mother, had killed her husband. Claudius, in order to exalt her son, to gratify him, she had never hesitated at doing or bearing anything, and yet this very son, her offspring, her emperor, elevated by her hand, after failing her often, finally took her life. It is indeed true that no one denies she would have well deserved this punishment, if only it had come to her by some other hand than that of the son she had brought into the world, who was even ever more easily managed, more naive, or, to speak quite frankly, a greater simpleton than Claudius the emperor, who was even more wrapped up in his wife than he in Messalina, whom he delivered finally into the hands of the executioner. Stupidity in a tyrant always renders him incapable of benevolent action, but in some mysterious way, by dint of acting cruelly, even toward those who are his closest associates. He seems to manifest what little intelligence he may have. Quite generally known is the striking phrase of that other tyrant, who, gazing at the throat of his wife, a woman he dearly loved, and without whom it seemed he could not live, caressed her with this charming comment: "This lovely throat would be cut at once if I but gave the order." This is why the majority of the dictators of former days were commonly slain by their closest favorites, who, observing the nature of tyranny, could not be so confident of the whim of the tyrant as they were distrustful of his power. Thus was Domitian killed by Stephen, Commodus by one of his mistresses, Antoninus by Macrinus, and practically all others in similar violent fashion. The fact is that the tyrant is never truly loved, nor does he love. Friendship is a sacred word, a holy thing. It is never developed except between persons of character, and never takes root except through mutual respect. It flourishes not so much by kindnesses as by sincerity. What makes one friend sure of another is the knowledge of his integrity, as guarantees he has his friend's fine nature, his honor, and his constancy. There can be no friendship where there is cruelty, where there is disloyalty, where there is injustice, and in places where the wicked gather there is conspiracy only, not companionship. These have no affection for one another. Fear alone holds them together. They are not friends, they are merely accomplices. Although it might not be possible, yet it would be difficult to find true friendship in a tyrant, elevated above others and having no companions. He finds himself already beyond the pale of friendship, which receives its real sustenance from an equality that, to proceed without a limb, must have its two limbs equal. That is why there is honor among thieves, or so it is reported. In the sharing of the booty, they are peers and comrades. If they are not fond of one another, they at least respect one another, and do not seek to lessen their strength by squabbling. But the favorites of a tyrant can never feel entirely secure, and the less so because he has learned from them that he is all-powerful and unlimited by any law or obligation. Thus it becomes his wont to consider his own will as reason enough, and to be master of all with never a compeer. Therefore it seems a pity that with so many examples at hand, with the danger always present, no one is anxious to act the wise man at the expense of the others, and that so many persons fawning upon their ruler, that is not a single one who has the wisdom and the boldness to say to him what, according to the fable, the fox said to the lion who feigned illness: "I should be glad to enter your lair to pay my respects, but I see my tracks of beasts that have gone toward you, yet not a single trace of any who have come back. These wretches see the glint of the despot's treasures, and are bedazzled by the radiance of his splendor. Drawn by his brilliance, they come near, without realizing they are approaching a flame that cannot fail to scorch them. Similarly attracted the indiscreet satyr of the old fables, on seeing the bright fire brought down by Prometheus, found it so beautiful that he went and kissed it, and was burned. So as the Tuscan poet reminds us, the moth intent upon desire seeks the flame because it shines, and also experiences its other quality, the burning. Moreover, even admitting that favorites may at times escape from the hands of him they serve, they are never safe from the ruler who comes after him. If he is good, They must render an account of their past and recognize at last that justice exists. If he is bad and resembles their late master, he will certainly have his own favorites who are not usually satisfied to occupy in their turn merely the posts of their predecessors, but will more often insist on their wealth and their lives. Can anyone be found then who under such perilous circumstances and with so little security will still be ambitious to fill such an ill-fated position and serve despite such perils, so dangerous a master? Good God, what suffering, what martyrdom all this involves! To be occupied night and day in planning to please one person, and yet to fear him more than anyone else in the world, to be always on the watch, ears open, wondering whence the blow will come, to search out conspiracy, to be on guard against snares, to scan the faces of companions for signs of treachery, to smile at everybody and be mortally afraid of all, to be sure of nobody, either as an open enemy or as a reliable friend, showing always a gay countenance despite an apprehensive heart, unable to be joyous, yet not daring to be sad. However, there is satisfaction in examining what they get out of all this torment, what advantage they derive from all the trouble of their wretched existence. Actually, the people never blame the tyrant for the evils they suffer, but they do place responsibility on those who influence him. Peoples, nations, all compete with one another, even the peasants, even the tillers of the soil, in mentioning the names of the favorites, in analyzing their vices, and heaping upon them 1,000 insults, 1,000 obscenities, 1,000 maledictions. All their prayers, all their vows are directed against those persons. They hold them accountable for all their misfortunes, their pestilences, their famines, and if at times they show them outward respect, at those very moments they are fuming in their hearts, and hold them in greater horror than wild beasts. This is the glory and honor heaped upon influential favorites for their services by a people who, if they could tear apart their living bodies, would still clamor for more, only half satiated by the agony they might behold. For even when the favorites are dead, those who live after it are never too lazy to blacken the names of these man-eaters. With the ink of 1,000 pens tear their reputations into bits in 1,000 books, and drag, so to speak, their bones past posterity, for even punishing them after their death for their wicked lives. Let us therefore learn, while there is yet time, let us learn to do good. Let us raise our eyes to heaven, for the sake of our honor, for the very love of virtue, or to speak wisely, for the love and praise of Almighty God, who is the infallible witness of our deeds, and the just judge of our faults. As for me, I truly believe I am right, since there is nothing so contrary to a generous and loving God as tyranny. I believe he has reserved in a separate spot in hell some very special punishment for tyrants and their accomplices.